Welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining our webinar on simpler recycling and the implications for rolling this out for people living in flats. And I'm extremely grateful to Nicole and Jean and Mike who've joined us to share their experience for the London boroughs of Islington and Southwark. Been working on this for a while. They're going to share some of their experience. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. So let's get some slides up and we'll be handing over in a moment to Nicole.
Hi all, nice to meet you. I'm Nicole. I work on Islington's recycling team and I look after projects for improvement recycling on estates specifically. So just to clarify for everyone, I look after the dry mix recycling improvements on estates rather than food waste. This is my colleague Jean and she'll speak to you about her project later. And I will take you through what we do to improve our dry mix recycling on council managed estates. So as a part of our service commitment, we aim to improve recycling, increase recycling rates. I believe all of us here are trying to do that in one way or another. The programme is specifically for council purpose-built blocks and it started around 2 years ago. It's a 3-year programme where we have funding for and it aims to ensure that all estates have enough space for them to recycle because this, I'm sure it's issue for most of you where we don't have the correct recycling capacity to allow people to dispose of their recycling. So this is number one. Wherever possible, recycling sites for estates are conveniently located within the grounds of the estate. This is very challenging for us in Islington due to space. Then local recycling facilities are kept to at least the flat's recycling package standard. To achieve this, we engage with residents so we can increase recycling on those sites. We committed to review on case-by-case basis whether refuse chutes are useful for certain sites, offer best option for sustainable waste management, and whether alternative solutions rather than chutes can help residents recycle and manage their waste better. We also pledged to include bins with greater accessibility, which we've already been doing with a second aperture opening for people with disabilities. We're expanding the food waste recycling facilities to all purpose-built blocks for flats, consisting of 7 or households or more, where there's space to accommodate the service in communal food waste recycling bins. And we also work towards ensuring that all estates meet the flat's recycling package standard. So we've based our programme structure on basically we have a lead officer, which is me, and then I have 2 more officers working in different sites of the borough. We've split our borough in 3 parts. Each officer gets a project list every year. And then we crack on with going to estate by estate and trying to improve their recycling. We have 5 stages in which we deliver our projects, recycling projects on estates. The stage 1, and to me, this is the most important stage, is the consultation with internal stakeholders. And this includes visiting the estate and sort of like creating the plan of what we're going to do. Usually the internal stakeholders for us include the housing team, number 1. Our first site visit is always with them. Estate coordinators, caretakers. Collections team, so usually supervisors and managers from the collections team, but sometimes the crews as well. There are sites where we need that inside knowledge from the crew. The fire safety team, very important. Housing transport management team, if needed, sometimes due to the lack of space, we are having to use parking bays, take away parking bays, so we engage with that team quite closely. The trees team, we need to ensure that we protect our green parts in Islington, which are also not a lot. So trees team are essential for some of our projects to ensure that we don't, harm any protected trees. And the grounds maintenance team as well. So this is our stage 1. This is when we visit the site with all of these internal teams and come to an agreement as to where the new recycling site will be. The stage number 2 is when we engage with contractors and suppliers. We share our proposal, for example, with contractors like Street Space, and we visit the site with them to see what's possible and what isn't. Stage 3 is when we start engagement with our external stakeholders. usually residents, TRAs, TMOs, neighbours of the block, and councillors. In stage 4, we're on site working to deliver the improvement project. We monitor we have a very big, complicated spreadsheet where we monitor our projects, where we collect feedback from residents, and share our experiences for specific cases on estates. This is where we will have the capacity as well for each blocks, what do they currently have and what they actually need, to make sure that the work that we do has impact on the site. So in terms of resident engagement, as you know, it's quite complicated and it's difficult to get people engaged with the subject matter. What we see is where there's a problem on the estate, a pre-existing problem with waste and recycling management, residents are quite active. But when there isn't a real issue, at least a visible one, with dumping and disorganised bins, where we know there's an issue in terms of capacity and we need to deliver a project, and residents don't necessarily see that problem. This is where we struggle when we're having to engage a bit more and do things a little bit differently. So for smaller estates, we usually just send a consultation letter detailing the nature of the project, the location of where we want the bins to be. We have some messages on the estate boards, and then we also do some door knocking on the smaller blocks, because that's very straightforward and simple. We just door knock, speak to people, share our thoughts on the future recycling plans so they can give us their feedback. Now, on estates over 50 households, door knocking is a bit more complicated. It takes a bit more time. So we had to get creative and try to engage with people in a different way. And this is where we usually use our online platform. This is where we use all the comms that we've designed specifically for these projects, such as posters, leaflets, and so on. We do recycling surveys with the blocks, again, messages on estate notice boards, and estate posters. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to show you the platform that we have and that we use to engage with people. It's called Let's Talk Islington, and the council usually uses it for consultations of all sorts. Thank you. So it's a very simple, we want to keep it short, we want to keep it simple for people. We usually send a letter out with a QR code, which they can scan, and the QR code brings them directly to this page. There's also a link, but we do offer paper copies for people that require them. So if you're not very tech savvy, we will send you a paper copy. But otherwise, use the QR code and that will bring you to this page. There's brief description of the project, how to get involved, any key dates associated, when the resident engagement will start, when it will stop, if the project's currently under review. That will also have who's listening or who's the project officer, so they can get in touch directly with you, and also attached the proposal in the improvement proposal section so people can see and comment on that. This is just some examples of the estate posters that we would use on bigger estates. So that will have the QR code directly leading them to the engagement page. And we also did the trifolds as well. It was very effective on the couple of estates that we did it on, because I guess just having that piece of just information there brings your attention to it. So we actually ended up getting quite a few responses. How we monitor and how we collect feedback. Now, after the residence project is completed, the improvement project is completed, we will send a simple card out, again with a QR code, which could either bring them to the Let's Talk page where there's a survey, or they can just fill this in and send it back to us without charge. There's only 3 questions. We just wanted to keep it as simple as possible. And we have had very good response on those as well. We also monitor the tonnages, the recycling tonnages. Now, this is currently happening only on few sites. We're planning to have this on more estates. We're planning to chip even more bins and be able to track the tonnages. But initial data shows very promising 20% increase in recycling on the sites where we've increased capacity, we've improved the location of the bins, and we've had that engagement with residents. And we've delivered currently engagements at 45 estates, so that's okay, which is around around 5,000 households now to date. And I've just included some before and after pictures. As you can see, this is the kind of work that my team does. And I think the image just speaks for itself on this one. Yeah, same as here. There was problems with lumber and just not enough bins. Usually the problem for us is not enough bins. And this is a very large project that we did with our architects team. And these are the major points. This, I think, from my presentation, and this is how we approach things from dry mix recycling perspective. It is a lengthy process. It can be done shorter. We find that we spend more time, of course, on the larger blocks, the smaller estates, because we don't do such an extensive consultation online. And the consultation is just essentially a letter informing people what we're planning to do. We still give them time to come back to us, but it doesn't take as much time and planning as the larger estates. We're still learning, but we know that so far what we did also have, we did create a report from our feedback cards recently for the past 2 quarters, and the feedback's largely positive from residents. It does make my estate look better. It does make it cleaner. It does make me recycle more. So we know we're on the right path. We're still learning lessons as we go, but we're now confident in what we're doing with this. So I'll take any questions if people have for me, probably at the end of the presentation, and I'll let my colleague Jean carry on with her slides. Thank you.
Excellent, Nicole. Thank you very much. Super interesting. Jean, over to you.
Well, hello everyone. So yeah, food waste recycling in estates and blocks. So basically, we already had about half of our borough council estates with food waste recycling for, gosh, over 11 years or so. And so a couple of years ago, we just finished that off and we rolled it out to the rest of the borough, private blocks included. So the first thing I would say is your one-stop shop is the guidance, the RAP toolkit, and that's really for how to do it and best practice. That's where you should go. So there you've got all the barriers, the solutions, you've got your different sections. So section 8 for communal food waste recycling to blocks. So that's particularly useful. And then you've got resources there. So we developed our own, but I mean, their resources are very succinct and excellent. So I'd highly recommend them as well. And then, you know, if you've already got services going on, it's hard to get people to keep going with the food waste recycling after the initial spurt, maybe. So it does have a lot of details on there. So for the real gritty, sort of down to earth stuff, get to the RAP website. But I'm going to talk about what we did as well following that. So you've got different types of ownership, right? We've got the council owned, and then you've got some that are run by the TMOs and the co-ops. And then, of course, you've got your RSLs like Peabody and so on. And then you've got lots of private blocks owned by lots of different people, and you'll be dealing with multiple managing agents that sometimes swap around quite quickly. So that's quite challenging. So Islington's got about 49,000 households in purpose-built blocks. So just to whiz through this is the basic equipment that we provide. So we've got 140 or 240 litre wheelie bins. So these are the lid ones. So you've got a restricted aperture at the top to prevent people just putting rubbish bags or bulky waste in there. And then we have optional bin housing units. I think we've tried to install those on most of the council estates, and that's part of what Nicole's doing as well when they're going and improving an estate. And if they've got bins just lying around without a unit over, they will improve them and put units over them. Stops them moving around and they're just more aesthetically pleasing. And then everybody will get a 5 litre kitchen caddy. We are wondering whether to just slightly change the colour for the rest of the rollouts because people don't like brown very much, but yeah, we might give them the option, I'm not sure. And then we've got rolls of compostable liners. Now these are optional. We do provide them at the rollout stage, and although our stuff goes off to anaerobic digestion, we still push the liners, and people can pick them up free from any Islington library, or they can just buy them from supermarkets. And then we have an instructional leaflet. Now, our leaflet is quite wordy, shall we say, but it covers as much as we possibly can. So yes, it's instructional, it's motivational, and then it tries to normalize the process, that everybody else is doing it, or lots of other people are doing it, so that first little part on the top left hand side, that's just going through what happens to the food waste once it's collected. You've got some top tips in there. The very dark green page, that's a list of where they can pick up the free compostable liners. So, we try and cover as many bases as we can. Also, there's a section there about how they make the most of the food that they buy and reduce the food waste in the first place. And that's got links to Love Food, Hate Waste and Eat Like a Londoner, which is just absolutely brilliant, with lots of top tips. So here are your communal food waste recycling considerations. Okay, provide all the equipment required. Don't ask for people to order stuff, find suitable location for the bins. So I'll go into that in a minute. Include the estate block management and residents. We kind of really dealt more with the TRAs and so on. I mean, predominantly what we're trying to do is put the food waste bins where there's already existing recycling bins, so it shouldn't be contentious. Good communications, so you've got your pre and post communications, and you've got a wrap toolkit for that. Access to liners, reliable collection service. Can't stress that enough. Once the system goes down, it's hard to get people back. And when maybe you've got I don't know, a vehicle that's gone down on a street property collection round, and you're going to have hundreds of people ringing in, it's very tempting to just take the food waste vehicle off and use it there, but don't do it if you can avoid it. And dedicated vehicles for the food waste will protect you from that temptation as well. And then the washing of bins, and that's quite important too. Right, so site considerations. Is there room for a bin? Basic. Avoid your slopes, because these bins get very, very heavy. Food waste is extremely heavy. Take a note at the keys, fobs and codes that are required, because you certainly don't want to roll out a service and then your crews can't get to it. Locate it, ideally, as I said before, near the existing bins. People are used to going there. Sometimes that doesn't happen. You want to spread them around the estate if it's a large estate, but that is good practice to have it all together. Please avoid placing near windows or anywhere where people are really going to suffer within their homes from the effects of a bin that's maybe getting a little bit smelly. And yes, you're pulling distance, of course, again, because of the weight as well as the health and safety guidelines that you'll have. And how many bins will be required? Well, we kind of work out that, looking at the participation that we have, 30 households per bin, 240 is fine, and about 15 to 18 for a 140. And then, future proofing, then it might be that you need to put more bins in if people start to use it more and more, or more frequent collections, but they have a weekly collection in our council. Right, here are your private block top tips. Okay, so the landlords and the managing agents. First of all, we put something out and we invited them to contact us. Now, this is a couple of years ago. I think now maybe they're realising it's a bit more pressing, so you might get a better response than we did. It's a bit of radio silence really when we put that out, and get in touch with all your P-bodies and RSLs and all that sort of thing, and get a dedicated person that you can work with for all their estates. If there's no responses, then, laborious as it is, go to the site, get inside that foyer and look on the wall, and there should be who the managing agents are, because that's normally who you're dealing with, and sometimes they swap over quite quickly. Okay, and then do your site visit, work out where everything's going to go, what access, fobs, keys and codes you're going to need from between the vehicle and where you're picking it up from. Then you contact the RSLs and you explain, the change in legislation, the need to install this, and you provide them with the sort of pictures I've got here, basically. So you're showing them that, yes, there's room for a bin, and this is where it's going, and this is the location on the map. Now that's twofold advantage, because it saves them having to go out, and then it also takes away them saying, oh, there's no room, because they're not keen on having it. And then you can invite them to distribute the equipment, because what we do is we like to have the caddy, the liner and the leaflet left outside each flat door. So you can invite them to do that, or ask them where they want it left, or you can do it yourself. And that's what we did predominantly. I mean, sometimes we said to them, look, we'll do it for you and you pay us. And sometimes that worked. But then some that we just get to get over the line, sometimes that's what we did. We just went out and we just distributed it. And now you've got funding, maybe you can fund for that. We were doing it without funding really at the time. You can also invite the landlords or managing agents to pay for an additional bin washing. So we only wash once a year. So they can pay ad hoc, or they can pay for sort of in advance, quarterly or monthly. So if they're complaining about the smells, well, it's within their control to get more washes, but they just have to pay for it. And then they can also pay for the installation of a bin cover unit. We're happy to order that within a certain window of time for them, because, you know, economies of scale, we can get it a little bit cheaper, we can get it put in for them. Right, so then we followed it up. Yes, we've got the service, but is anybody using it? So we did a borough-wide campaign, which wasn't predominantly just for estates, it was for all the street properties as well. And I won't list all of those, you can read them for yourself, but this is the sort of thing we use. We do have electronic notice boards on all our council estates. As some of the other things, oh yes, the vehicle naming competition. So this is our Tuberg dedicated food waste vehicle. And we invited school children to come up with names for the vehicle, which was great fun. And then we picked 15 of the most suitable ones, and we invited our recycling champions to then vote on the one they preferred. So now you've got our magnificent food waste muncher, and he's a little character in himself. You know, we were doing an event just on Sunday, and he turns up, you know, like a fire engine turns up, you know, and people sit and they go up and down in the vehicle, you know, in the on the seat, and it's striking as it's driving around the borough, so it's a good advocate for us. So yes, we've got we did some videos, so we've got door knocking. We did a bit of door knocking as well. We'd been doing a huge door knock campaign actually on the street properties, which was very targeted, and I'm happy to, you know, provide any information on that independently of this. But we did a smaller scale door knocking of about sort of 1,500 households, and it was in the form of informal chats, you know. So knock on the door, hello, we're from recycling, how are you getting on with your recycling? You know, do you recycle your food waste too? Have you had a go at that? And responding, you know, the response that you get, you know, then you just pick up and answer the conversation. So predominantly you've got things about, oh, it's smelly, you know, I don't want it, it's going to be smelly. Well, then we say, well, you know, use your liners, you can get them for free. And then every 2 or 3 days, don't wait for it to fill up, just tie it up and pop it out in the outside communal bin, and that food waste will be out of your kitchen before the food waste that's in your refuse bag that's also in your kitchen, you know. If they're saying, I mean, space is a real concern for people on estates. So if they're saying, oh, there's no room for a caddy, you can say, well, you can use whatever you want. I mean, you can use a margarine tub if you want, you know, or something, just empty it. Or another one is, we don't have food waste. And then you just sort of highlight, well, yeah, but you know, there's eggshells and banana skins and so on. And for people that home compost, which you won't get on these estates, you can also say, yeah, but you can't compost meat and dairy. So, you know, and then what happens to it? People are amazed about what happens to it. So we explain that process. So just if these conversations come up really, but the messages that really resonated were, you know, even a small amount matters. So we sort of say, oh, go on, give it a go. You know, just one banana skin, you know, generates enough power to charge a smartphone. Why don't you do your eggshells, your banana skins and your tea bags first and see how you get on? Money saving as well for the council. I mean, we save over £100 a tonne, compared to treating it as refuse. And so we sort of, people are quite amazed at that. And we say, that can be used for other services. And then also some messages that we like to give people that are already dedicated food waste recyclers is about the food waste reduction message. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but this was our electronic notice board messages, but they're kind of the messages that I've just mentioned on the previous slide. And we've got the QR code there that takes them straight to our dedicated food waste recycling web pages. And this is our Islington Life magazine. I mentioned the video. So in that first sort of green article, that's Manrico. He's one of the food waste recycling officers, and he was giving us a demonstration on good old Italian poverty cooking and making, a lovely meal out of tomatoes and old bread and basil. But this magazine goes to all of our households, and we've also got online, and our overall strap line was do amazing things with your food waste. Oh, that's it. Okay. Hey. But all in all, I mean, it went down well. And I think my take home thing would be try and make it as easy as possible for people, give them all the equipment. When you're door knocking, if you hand over equipment that they need at that doorstep, strike while the iron's hot, and do make sure that you do really good site visits when you're first going to be rolling this out, particularly with private landlords, so that you've got everything that you need and you're making it as easier for them to comply.
Thanks, Jean. That's really interesting. So we now move across to Mike.
Good morning, everyone. This is just some basic facts about Southwark's borough profile. We're a surprisingly varied borough in terms of our geography. You've got parts of the borough which feel like villages in the home counties, and parts of it which very definitely feel like central London with high rise and crowded town centres. We're also a very ethnically and culturally diverse populations, which creates a whole range of different communication questions, different tone and style of communications that work best with different sections of the population. I won't go into too much detail around this, but the slides can be distributed later if people want any further information. In terms of the rollout, we started early 2023, discussion with our contractor about contract variations to make this possible. The intention was that we develop a clear plan. We've agreed all the kind of main elements, and we're then just waiting for the funding information from DEFRA that enables us to kind of get final approval based on the finances they are in place. And that enabled us, as soon as we had DEFRA funding confirmed, we went to our cabinet member to get a service rollout and outline project plan. It was really a kind of rubber stamp on a plan that had already been approved in principle. So we were ready to go as soon as we had confirmation of funding. The main reason that sat behind that was that we were concerned that if we started planning once we knew how much money we'd got, we'd then find ourselves in a situation where we'd potentially be joining a long queue for some of the kind of supply chains, particularly for vehicles and stuff like that. And that would then potentially move on the whole project because we wouldn't be able to get things through in time. Given that we started in April 2024, the rollout date for the end of October 2024. So in other words, based on the prior discussions we've already had with the various suppliers, how long it would take them to get things to us to enable the rollout, how long it would take us to distribute them. It's quite a short amount of time. It's very much an agile project where we sprint to get it into motion. We get the service started and running, and we then continue to fine tune after we've got the service rolled out. So we had contingencies in place. We ended up hiring vehicles in because we couldn't get all 6 of the vehicles that we needed prior to the service rollout in October, but we had availability of hired vehicles, added a certain amount of cost to it, but that was manageable in the overall context of what we were spending on the project. And the overall emphasis was about good pre-planning everything that we were doing so that we could get to that sprint for implementation. And all 6 new crews mobilised successfully on 21st of October. So that helped create a focus. It created a bit of a buzz. It meant that things were happening, and it then became easier. Not necessarily everybody was included in the service right from the start, but we had a route that covered every area of the borough. So we could then catch up and fill in the gaps, engage with property managers that either hadn't agreed or just hadn't taken the actions necessary to get it implemented. We made it very clear throughout that process that it wasn't an option. We set the parameters very clearly. This is a service we have to deliver. If you don't accept a food waste service from the council, you obviously can't have a service from the council at all where you're presenting food waste in any other kind of bin. And, you know, we were prepared to use Section 46 powers. Frankly, property managers generally back down. They were happy to take a food waste bin and promote the service amongst residents on the basis that they knew that residents wouldn't necessarily all separate their food waste, but that was far better than having a situation where we said to them, if you have no food service, we won't take a general waste bin at all if it's got any food waste in it of any kind. So the key focus was to roll out the service smoothly so it actually started to happen, stabilise the collection service. There's always a level of disruption in collection services once you undertake any kind of change, whether it's a routine change or a new service, and then engage in larger scale communications to increase resident participation. So it was about making sure that it hit the ground running and we then make the service work harder and sweat the assets. Key lessons learned. And for us in Southwark, a single large rollout was definitely the right decision. I mean, we've got 150,000 households in total, of whom round about a third, the street level properties already have the service. So we're talking about roughly 100,000 people in a single, 100,000 households, I should say, with a single big bang. If we'd done it in phases over time, it would have taken much longer and cost much more. And it enabled us to kind of just make sure that we achieve coverage and then fill in the gaps later. I think what we potentially could have done better was a stronger communications campaign well in advance. It might have smoothed the rollout in some of the places where we had sort of like extended engagement with property managers to make sure it actually happened in all locations. But actually, if we'd had a higher level of engagement right from the start, it would have been harder to manage as crews were getting used to new routes. And that was the most important thing, to know where they were going. We had to recruit 6 entirely new crews, and although we backfilled some of our existing staff into the new services because they've got our working methods clearly understood, there was still an awful lot of new refuse collectors that were out there delivering this new service. We know that if we can recycle enough food waste, that covers the cost of being able to provide the service. So in other words, the cost of all those operatives and vehicles could be outweighed conceivably by the amount of food waste recycled. We're a long way from that yet, but it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that we could get there within the next couple of years. So in other words, it's a net neutral cost of providing the service, taking into account food waste, overall savings compared to general waste disposal. And we absolutely think that the use of food waste units on estates was critical to acceptance of the service. We would have struggled to get engagement with people with a brown bin on the estate, even with the lid-in-lid technology. It would have been much more difficult to persuade people to take it seriously. It also provided a wipe clean kind of surface with stickers on it that explains the use of the service. So it's a good advert on the estates for how they would be used. Another point is that data is absolutely critical. You have to know exactly how many flats in each block estate, how you access them, who the property manager is, and of course all the things about access and keys and stuff like that are really important. Getting the data analysis tools right from the start when you're gathering that data so that you can properly manage it and understand how, for example, each flat relates to each block or each estate, so that you can kind of link them all together. Particularly on estates and private blocks, you'll sometimes find associations between multiple blocks that might be geographically separate but might have a common property manager, even though they might appear in all the data systems of the council as just being 4 separate blocks of flats. You effectively end up treating them as one for the purposes of service delivery. And the other thing, councillor support really made a difference for us. Engaging with councillors, they often have the granular knowledge of who to engage with at a local level, who to work with, and can help get things done in terms of their local networks. Next slide, please. And the things that we might do differently, probably more upfront resident property manager engagement. We did take very much a tone of, this is an obligation, we're consulting you on how, we're not consulting you on whether. And we've made it very clear throughout the entirety of the process that we're framing this as an obligation. You need to separate your food waste from general waste and place it in bins. It's a tough message to start with, but the intention here is that rather than trying to persuade people, wouldn't it be nice if you recycled your food waste, framing it as an obligation and persisting with that message will eventually get through. I think if we'd had more upfront communication, if we'd had more time to do that, more resources committed, we might have had a smoother implementation and would probably have got a higher level of tonnage by now. And we would have certainly planned our first major communications campaign to take place earlier after the service started. We're going to be doing that, our big communication campaign, after the sort of like post-launch instructional stuff. This is what you do, this is why you do it, this is how you do it. We're now looking for the persuasion more and sort of like just trying to simplify it in people's minds. And that's going to start rolling out after the summer holidays this year. I would certainly go for more engagement with councillors in the planning stages. We certainly have very strong support from the council's cabinet and leadership, but probably should have engaged more locally. And there's still a debate, should we have taken longer than 6 months from decision to rollout? I think that having that strong focus where you work through, drive through, power through the project and make sure it delivers, and then fix whatever you find afterwards, was probably more effective than stretching it out for a longer period of time. And the results, primary objective was achieved. It became a business as usual service. We didn't hit the local media or anything like that with adverse reports, so this was successful. We've had tonnage levels which have been reasonable but not outstanding, so participation is still pretty low in communal service areas. We reckon that we're likely to add about 2 percentage points to our recycling rate, which is not nothing. If every bit of food waste was recycled, we would add in excess of 20 points to our recycling rate. So we're only 10% of the way in, long way to go, but that's not a bad result so far. There's been an increase as well that we've seen in general recycling tonnages, and the early data suggests a generalised fall in general residual waste. So what would seem to have happened as a result of food waste participation is that more residents have recycled more as well, and overall the general residual waste has come down. And we actually won the highly commended, so the runner-up category in the Service Change of the Year award category at the LARAC Awards. Okay, thank you. It's the end of the presentation.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
Lots of really, crucial stuff you shared there. Really appreciate that. So we've got quite a few questions, and I'm not sure that we'll be able to do justice to them all. But one is around the sort of the looming deadline, if you like, and in terms of the end of March 2026 in Islington and Southwark. Do you think that you would achieve that?
I think if we were starting now to roll out a food waste service, the biggest difficulty would be supply of vehicles. So I suspect there's, somebody who was sort of like kicking off a project now to roll out food waste would struggle to get everything they need to be able to roll out in time for the notional statutory deadline. I suspect that DEFRA will apply it flexibly where there are supply chain issues. If you can't get the vehicles to do it with, they'll kind of give a certain amount of flexibility. A couple of the questions that I could see coming up in terms of the rollout of the service in Southwark, were we able to keep within the budget provided by DEFRA? There was some, I looked through the funding model that was provided, or the outputs of the funding model. I couldn't get access to the funding model itself to kind of break down how it was. There was some broadly sensible kind of assumptions about costings for most things. The one thing that wasn't funded is the food waste collection units that the bins go inside. So the metal cabinets into which you put the bins, we ended up having to fund it out of our own reserves. So that's not something that DEFRA met the kind of funding requirements for. We generally tried to have a sort of like a capital heavy approach, where what we look to do is run the service so that it balances its own costs and spend all our money up front as a one-off. We were in the position where we could make that investment, something like £750,000 for food waste units. Whether other authorities will all be able to do the same remains to be seen, I suppose.
What about Islington, Jean? Does that's been funded from within the council's budgets for quite a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah, we've just funded it ourselves. We sort of cracked on, especially with the private blocks and so on, before there was any funding as such. But we managed it, we'd got some money spare, but that's why we didn't put food waste units over everything. That's why people, if they wanted it, would have to pay for it. But we were in the lucky position that we'd already got at least half of our council estates had got food waste in there for years, and a lot of those had already got some units over them. So it was just a matter of finishing off the job, really. It is going to be, now we're concentrating on flats above shops, so that's where we're going to be using the funding for, and I'm in the middle of, at the start really, of kind of trying to roll that out. We managed, but I think it is going to be the timelines for supply probably now that's going to be a problem, but everybody's doing it at the same time, so let's hope that there's some flexibility.
Excellent. Are we generally finding that particularly on estates, the use of some sort of housing or enclosure is definitely advantageous in terms of getting more participation? We generally agreed around that. What would you say, Nicole? You've had a lot of experience in this.
I would say yes, but that needs to be combined with other improvements, basically improvement on recycling capacity. We find that, so residents like them. We know that from aesthetic reasons. We have a fully aesthetics question on our survey feedback card. So we know they like them, but to increase capacity, we need to increase the number of them. So I would say yes, they absolutely work. Residents love them and they do make the site look a lot better, but we need to ensure that capacity is increased and it matches the needs of the block for them to be successful. We do also want to note another thing, that when we go to deliver a project on a specific estate, we look at the location as well of where these units are. So if they are at the front of the block, if they are near the main road, we would look to move them. We would look to hide them from the main road to also reduce fly tipping. So there's a couple of things to consider when installing them, increased capacity and the location, but they do definitely improve fire safety and they improve how the area looks. So people do use it more, and they tend to keep it cleaner as well, just because it's a place that now looks better.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Great points there. So Maria, do you want to come in with a question?
I do, yeah, thank you. I think it was mainly Nicole in regards to the phase 1 of your project, and you were talking about kind of already having funding before you were able to do stage 1, 2 and 3. How did you go about getting that initial funding for such a significant project? And second question, which is not, it was about contamination also. We have used some Metro bin stores or other units, and we've had fixed apertures. How have you approached trying to tackle the issue of contamination going into those bins?
So number one, the funding question. Oh, it's a difficult question, isn't it, for all of us? How do we get so much money to start a project like this? So with the program that we started in Islington, we had obtained funding from an internal program called Thriving Neighbourhoods, so an internal fund. So we already had the funding secured for 3 years before we started the program. So we knew we had sort of enough in the pot. Now that we're moving towards year 3, we're realizing we need more, right? We need more money, because it's never just the recycling that needs fixing. It's also the refuse. You can't go to an estate, fix the recycling bins and leave the refuse bins. And our funding was dedicated for recycling improvements only. So this is where the challenge this is where the challenge for us comes in. But yeah, we had funding secured before we started the program to be able to start. It is expensive. It's not. It's a big expense. And to your second question about contamination. Contamination on all estates is a problem, and it's a problem on our estates as well. I guess the thing that we do when we deliver those projects is to ensure that there's refuse close by. So if the site, if we're installing 5 recycling bins, we would look to bring in some refuse bins next to it to try and target contamination. Because we do notice that when you have a row of recycling bins only, they tend to be contaminated. I wouldn't... Do I say that the apertures, we have had feedback in terms of putting cardboard through the apertures and the apertures being not big enough? We got that overwhelming feedback from residents when we sent out the cards saying, you know, make the apertures bigger. But if we did that, then that would invite even more contamination. We don't find any big black bags inside just because it's quite difficult to get a black bag through that aperture. So we're currently working with Street Space to develop something on the side for cardboard, only for cardboard, to tackle that feedback that we're getting, that the people just don't bother flattening the cardboard and they leave it next to the enclosures. But I think they reduce contamination because of the size of the aperture and people not being able to put big bulky items inside. On a lot of estates, we have the lockable bins, but in reality, they are left unlocked more often than not, so they do get contaminated. And the units help at that point with the smaller aperture.
So thank you, Nicole. Jan, do you want to come in with a question?
Excellent presentations from everybody. Thank you this morning. And just to explain for those people on the call who don't know me, I'm an old housing manager. I've been around a very long time, years older than you, Michael, I've got to tell you. But I'm really interested in I'm an ex-chief officer in London as well. So I'm just interested to know what information sharing is going on between London councils, because you guys and girls seem to be clearly on top of it. Are all of the London boroughs in a similar situation? Do you know what else is going on? Because it seems to me that there's the old story about silos working, and I suspect this may be the case as well. Just curious to know what information you have. That's the first question. The second question is about how you're dealing with older residents or people less able to do stuff themselves, in encouraging them to follow through on the food waste separation. Thank you.
I think, first of all, yes, the housing revenue account general fund split in local authorities does tend to create a certain amount of silo working. And there is always a risk that the housing department sees its primary function as housing and the directly related functions, and less about the management of waste, which is seen as another service. So it takes a conscious effort to sort of break down those barriers. And on a practical level, I can think of many of our housing officers that I have really strong engagement relationships with and extensive joint working, and others where it's less so, sometimes because there is less willingness to kind of from the part of the tenants themselves to kind of work with waste management, and they just see it as a we throw it away and you take it away kind of thing. So I think there's an awful lot of work to be done in terms of joining that up, because success will come from housing departments working closely with waste departments. And the more close that work is, the more successful it will be. And the benefits for housing departments are potential improvements in amenity values, reduction in complaints, reduction in cleaning costs, and general higher resident satisfaction, because it's one of the more obvious ways in which resident satisfaction is affected if there is widespread dumping. It can also contribute a bit to a cycle of kind of decline if the first person that dumps a bag of waste is the first person starting a pile that others then add to. Whereas, you know, as Nicole's outlined, having those kind of units there that kind of raise the standard of behaviour, give people somewhere to put it, provide sufficient capacity, is really helpful. I think there's an awful lot more that still needs to be done to engage housing departments in engagement in recycling services more generally. And in terms of engagement with older people, in some ways, the ideas that older people naturally grew up with were more towards conservation of resources and stuff like that. So it's often easier having arguments with, you know, people in their 70s on estates about recycling food waste, because it makes more sense to them. You shouldn't be wasting food waste. You should be recovering, you know, they're sometimes surprisingly keen recyclers, and sometimes it's the more hard-pressed generation that are juggling with kids and nursery runs and all sorts of things like that, that it's actually harder to reach. So it's not simply a case of older people are harder to kind of reach and get to engage in recycling services. I think in some estates, they're absolutely the bedrock of our success in recycling.
Great question and great points there, Mike. Nicole, would you add to that, your experience?
Yeah, I wanted to add that we also installed the accessible recycling bins and accessible recycling enclosure, which has the second opening, which is usually for older people, people with disabilities, which we've had some great feedback on those. They work, and we'll carry on installing them. And this is something something small that we're doing for our elderly and disabled residents to ensure that they can recycle as well, but also making sure that these new sites are in a convenient location, as convenient as possible, closer to the block, and within the estate boundary. That also helps. In terms of engagement, we've had a few cases where it has been difficult to reach all residents with our new, QR codes and links and websites. But we do have very active residents in Islington. They'll usually just phone up and they'll find us if they want to talk to us, or we do door knocking as well. So this is how we manage to reach them. The reality is we'll never be able to reach 100% of residents, and I don't think we'll ever be able to get 100% engagement rate when it comes to recycling, because I find that people engage with recycling when they have an issue with it. If everything's fine, if they consider everything to be fine, it's very difficult to get them to come back to you and to engage. But there are different ways in which we're trying and learning to get there.
That's excellent.
I was just going to say as well, if elderly residents can't really get to the bins or whatever, the caretakers, if there's a particular issue, they actually go and collect and take the stuff to them. And I think making recycling, or certainly food waste recycling, as easy as possible. So we, where there are concierge offices as well on the estate, we ensure that they've got a supply of compostable liners for people as well.
Yeah, that's good. And I wondered if it partly it led into one of the questions, Jean, whether you could say any more about recycling champions. Presumably they can help out as well in this, area.
Yes, they can. But the recycling champions, we try and engage with them, but whether they don't really go out and do that kind of work. They might come and help at what we've found. They want to maybe come and help at a stall or something like that. So we're trying to reinvigorate our recycling champion offering and get them a little bit more involved. You'll get one or two that are super interested, but all in all, they're not really going out. We do invite them, but they're not going out sort of helping with the door knocking or things like that. We're more just wanting them at the very least to kind of talk to their peers about recycling and, maybe distribute a few leaflets and things. But in all honesty, we wouldn't rely on them to go out into the community and sort of take people's waste and put it in the right place or anything like that.
Yes, I see. That's good, thank you. So we have got a question about what kilograms per household are being achieved. Do we have anything like that, or is that something that we could perhaps report back on in a few months?
Report back, please.
I did post some information in the chat about that. It's very variable, and I think it's extremely unstable in the sense that you can go and do engagement visits with property managers, cleaners and caretakers on an estate and get a significant increase in the period afterwards with some leaflet deliveries and poster displays and stuff like that. It's too early to say whether those improvements are sustained or whether that's something we just have to keep going round and doing every few months to kind of maintain that kind of level. But ours varies between round about 20 kilograms per household per year collected food waste and 80 kilograms per household per year at the top end, and the average would come out at about 40. So it's okay. it's a long way to go, and it's still got an awful lot more food that's going in the general waste that we can sort of like pull out if we can get more resident engagement. But we see this as the start of a journey. First, have the service. Once you've got all your vehicles going out and completing around every day, and you know, we issued capacity to each estate on the basis that we provided generally 240 litre bins for most blocks of a decent size. We were projecting our food waste take as being those bins no more than half full with a reasonable level of participation. So there's still plenty of excess capacity to go. We took the view that the worst thing to happen was a bin overflowing with food waste, and therefore trying to keep all bins no more than half full, add more bins if they start consistently getting to that level of fill, so that there's kind of more bins and more units out there. That's the way of driving it forward. And I think the key thing is the reliable service. Incidentally, just one point of difference, and time will tell whether this is the right approach or not, but we didn't provide any cornstarch bags to any of our residents. We said to people, if you want to use them, we're not going to stand in your way. You can buy them, they're cheap. And we took essentially the same framing position, really, that we don't buy your dustbin bags. Why would we buy your food waste bags? It would have added considerably to the operational costs, but that's a final point to leave.
It's a question that often comes up. Excellent. Well, really appreciate everything you've shared there. Appreciate everybody attending. I think that's drawn it to a close, but eager to keep the conversation going, and especially that sort of ongoing relationship and piece of work between the council waste and housing teams, and perhaps even more challengingly is the registered providers, isn't it? Where you don't have already have a direct sort of means of communication. You might not even know who they are, and of course they may hardly know who you are. And so one of the key things I think is to try and that maybe is something that we can help with at Metrostore, is we're talking to the landlords all the time. We know who the waste and recycling teams are, and maybe we can help connect and sort of encourage those conversations to take place. So it's been super interesting. Really appreciate everything you put into that, Nicole, Jean, Mike. Thanks everyone for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.